Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Blockchain Gamer.biz's weekly news roundup, where we discuss all of the biggest headlines in blockchain gaming from the week. And as always, I am joined by the lovely John Jordan. Hi, John. How are you?
I don't think you've ever called me that in 2 years. What have I done this week to become lovely? Fantastic.
I just know you've got a lot of great input to add to today's discussions.
Good. Let's hope I continue being lovely.
Right, I'm your host, Jenny Jordan. It is Friday, the 2nd of May. Let's get cracking. Right, we're starting with some Pixels news. Staking is now enabled in Pixels. It's gone live as of yesterday, I think. Obviously, this is part of a bigger sort of strategy where Pixels is moving towards a new reward system. They've been reworking their reward system for a long time, but now we're starting to sort of see some of the fruit of that. It's moving us towards Apptokens, which is kind of the biggest, will be the biggest change, I suppose. And with that will be the introduction of the vPIXEL tokens. I don't think those are live yet, but you've been talking to Luke Pawlikowski this week, the CEO of Pixels. So fill in the details for us, please.
Yeah. I mean, it's in our line of work, it's sort of easy to get sort of carried away with lots of things being very sort of significant, and maybe I will get carried away with this in Pixels. But I do think this is a big deal for Pixels itself, which we've sort of covered a lot in the last year, and for the wider industry, partly because of this. It's the first game to use this Apptoken standard that we've been banging on about for the last sort of 6 months or so. So, I mean, a bit of background as I always like to do. So we've been talking about Pixels a lot over the last year because Pixels sort of came from nothing on the Polygon blockchain, launched on Ronin in November 2023, and just sort of exploded. Really, very high levels of growth. Peaked at over 1 million daily active unique wallets in August. Launched its token sort of this time last year, and that sort of drove a lot of that growth. But sort of since then, as we've seen with many sort of blockchain games that get that sort of level of success when they're effectively giving away tokens, it's very hard to design a system that's sustainable, and actually you end up being a little bit addicted to your daily user numbers and not being aggressive enough, sort of tailoring who you give tokens to. So you end up just, there's a lot of, obviously we know in blockchain and in any computer system, there's a lots of sort of bots or extractive users, or however you want to describe them. There's lots of people who are in there not for the sort of core experience, they're in there for what they can get from it. And that's particularly obviously relevant in blockchain, where you have these tokens which have value that can be cashed out. So that's really been, in a sense, Pixels has been a victim of its own success. And it's now, its numbers are down 90%. Its token price is down, I think, even more than 90%. So just, it's gone through the sort of usual process that lots of blockchain games do. What's interesting in this case is Luke is, I think, very switched on. He's not really a games guy; he's more a tech guy, but he's has a very clear vision, and always had a very clear vision. And he's been sort of implementing against that vision of, I need to find the people who love my game and give them more of the tokens, and they'll spend them in the game and end up spending more money in the game. So he has this now, idea of return on rewards as a ratio. So they give out, I think it's 28 million Pixel tokens every month, and he's been trying to, find the user base that he can give those to, in the hope that they get 28 million and one token spent in the game, because then people are spending more than they're getting given, and you're starting to build, a sort of what he sees as a sort of a marketing machine where you can give away this value, but you're going to get more back. So that's sort of been his vision for a while now. It's very, very hard to do. And they've gone down from 1 million daily active unique wallets, they're down to about 35,000 now. So a really big drop. But for him, that's the point. If he ends up with, he hasn't said this, but if he ends up with 10,000 and he's starting to generate net sort of revenue, that's sort of his end goal. He doesn't really care how many he's got, because once you start building that, then you can sort of you can rebuild your audience, because you basically you realize your audience was basically a whole bunch of bots and extractive people. So now, there are ways you could do this without this Apptoken protocol, but the thing about this Apptoken protocol is it is an on-chain protocol. So it sort of gives you like Web 2 control over your economy, but using smart contracts. It's a very big sort of concept. We've spoken about it before. There's a really good, if you Google Apptokens white paper, there's a whole bunch of stuff you could be doing. This is a very, very simple, probably the most simple implementation of Apptokens you could do. And sort of what they're doing is they're creating a new token, you say, called vToken, so sort of virtual vPIXEL. vPIXEL. So Pixel is their token on Ronin, and they have this vPIXEL token. And vPIXEL is a cryptocurrency, it's an on-chain currency, but the only things you can do with it are spend it in the game. So you spend it like Pixel, so it's a 1-to-1 sort of ratio. There's this new staking system, so you can stake it, and then you can extract it to sort of sell it on, but you basically will pay a fee, what they call a farming fee, and that's not been confirmed, but probably about 50%. So if I had 100 vPIXEL tokens, I'd have to basically give up 50 of them to extract 50, and those 50 tokens that I've paid as my farming fee would go back to the people who are staking. So it's basically giving much more control. You obviously could, that 50% could be 99%, or they have control over what that will be.
It's a false use case where you can sell it to use it in the other games within the Pixels ecosystem as well, I should mention.
Yeah. So this is this is the other sort of core thing. This is within the Pixels system, but the other thing that Apptokens do, as Luke said when I spoke to him, you could build like an off-chain sort of currency that could be used in other games. I mean, no one's ever really done that. You could do it with API calls, but you just end up in the same situation as all these MMOs have, where people are gold farming and stuff like that. So you'd have to have like massive amounts of security, and you'd be dealing with bots all the time. And at least the thing about blockchain is sort of bots are part of the system, so you can sort of deal with them as part of the system rather than having this whole other thing about bots. And because it's the ERC20, ERC20C is what the protocol is actually called, Apptoken protocol. So ERC20 is the standard fungible token standard for Ethereum blockchains. So anyone can sort of just plug into this V token system without doing anything complicated, because obviously these things are just interoperable. So the nice thing they've done with staking is you are staking not into sort of validators like you would do with a blockchain, but in terms of what you're looking at is, you're looking at the moment, there's 3 games using the Pixel token and in future the vPIXEL token. So that's Pixels, obviously. Then there's this game called Pixel Dungeons, which has been out for about 6 months. It's a fairly simple sort of top-down dungeon game where you pay a sort of a fee to get in there, and then you can run around collecting the Pixel tokens, directly Pixel tokens, and fighting with other people and all that sort of stuff. So there's that very small game. Then this other game called Forgotten Universe, which is actually a fairly big MMORPG, just launched on Ronin, sort of a pixelated top-down. I've only just started playing it. Quite nice. Probably not a mass market game, but they were going to launch their own token, and now they've gone with this Pixels thing. So basically what you end up with, if you have currently, because vPIXELs isn't live, you just have the Pixel token. If you have Pixel token in your wallet, you can go to these 3 games, and you can basically stake your tokens into you choose one of them. You can put, if you had 100 tokens, you could put 33 into each, or whatever. There's no restriction there. And these sort of act like validators or sort of liquidity pools that at the moment, 28 million sort of pixels is going into the Pixel ecosystem, and that's going to start going into this staking system. So Pixels will get most of it to begin with. So, if you had 10% of the Pixel token staked in Pixels, you get 10% of the rewards. But over time, they're going to add more games in there. Sounds like quite aggressively, they're going to add games in there. Don't have to be Ronin games, so could have games on other EVM chains, because all you're doing is having this staking thing. And what happens is, over time, if more Pixel tokens is staked into a particular game, that's going to get more of the rewards. That game can then choose how much of the rewards it gives back to its audience, and so you basically start to have a bit of an internal market about which game is sort of attracting the biggest audience. Presumably those people are not just staking, they're probably playing the game. Maybe you're getting more sort of social interaction around that game. People are saying, come and play this game and we'll get more rewards. So it may not work, as all these things may not do, but now we have this sort of an internal market of people using this Pixels token. Obviously they can be running their own economies as well with their own tokens, but this is sort of like a meta sort of economy running over the top of these games. And the hope is that this is creating sort of another sort of counterbalance to how Pixels are being used. Obviously, staking is something that's been used a lot because you're locking people up, so they're not selling their tokens; they're locking them into a contract, and obviously they're trying to get some reward from that, and then they can sell that off. So, but it's creating a sort of a pool that isn't being sold. And it's also good for some of the sort of bigger players who might go, I'm never going to play this game, but I might come in and obviously people in crypto have millions of dollars they can sort of drop into these things. If they go, well, I'm going to get like 20% back on the pixels, and I'm part of this ecosystem. Obviously, Ronin has a lot of sort of whales in there. It's quite an innovative way of doing it. So we'll see how it works. We'll see sort of if it works. I mean, the pixels token price has gone up a little bit from where it was, but it was like rock bottom, so it's a long way to go up. It's not clear that it's going to be an immediate sort of success story, but I think it goes to show this is how one project has sort of looked at this sort of new functionality they can have in terms of controlling how a token operates, and it's not just a free floating token that gets sold off immediately as soon as you get it. As Luke says, they've given out over the sort of process over the game's lifetime so far. They've given out over $100 million worth of pixel tokens, and that's one of the problems. If you give away that much, people just immediately sell it. And he says, they track all this sort of stuff. They just know even people playing the game, as soon as they get a balance of tokens, pixel tokens, they're just selling them, because a lot of people obviously are in countries where if I can cash out $5, that's a sort of a meaningful sort of sum of money. So this is just a way of trying to get more control over that, and even if they fail, I think it's important that we sort of highlight that these sort of factors are now in, and people are sort of dealing with this. And if it works, then as Luke's real idea now is he's trying to build like a marketing sort of funnel, a profitable marketing funnel that potentially could be used for Web 2 games. He's not really said that, but clearly it sort of could do that. Obviously, he's a very blockchain focused guy, so. But it could be good for the whole sort of ecosystem and even beyond Ronin. So I think it's quite a
What I really like about Luke is that he's really not afraid of trying new and experimenting. I mean, like Web3 gaming, decentralized gaming and a decentralized economy sounds, hypothetically, this is really going to work, but clearly it's turned out it's not working, and it's a bit similar with Apptokens now. Because it's so early, it's like theoretically this is a really good idea, and let's just wait and see whether the implementations sort of prove to be as successful as it kind of looks on paper. And he is not scared at all of just throwing himself out there and trying.
And the thing, I think his advantage is he's not like a guy who's been making games for 20 years, and in that scenario you get very fixed into this is the game I want to make, and the game sort of comes first, and this new way of building economies and stuff, sort of gets bolted onto it. And we've sort of clearly seen that hasn't worked. And one of the advantages with Pixels is we sort of call it a social RPG, but it's not in some ways it's formally like not a game. It's just a basis. There is obviously farming elements. There is a game elements in there, but it's not sort of defined as a game as you would say Axie Infinity or Off the Grid are, which when you talk about those games, it's like, well, this is what you do in the game. With Pixels, it's just not that sort of experience. So he has the flexibility to sort of be a bit more sort of daring around that sort of stuff in a way that other games probably couldn't. But I think that's that's absolutely to his advantage.
And you do see, I mean, loads of people are criticizing the way Pixels is going, the fact that they've given up all the fun and immersive gameplay parts to only focus on the economy parts, but clearly that's the way that the team is very determined to go, and it's credit to them that they're sticking with their vision.
Well, I think the other thing is as well is we can't at the moment we have many years into blockchain games as a thing. Maybe I mean, how many years I've been in it now? I'm sort of getting on for 7. And you can't really point to any sort of great sustainable successes. At the moment with the crypto side, you have these big chart, Axie up and then sort of straight back down again when the money sort of dries up. And we have to think. I think we have to be a bit more open about the successful blockchain games will probably not look like successful non-blockchain games. If we think this thing is so significant as a sort of a fundamental part of how you would build a game and communities and blah, then you're not just bolting that onto the sort of simple genres we've seen in the past. You need to come up with something fairly different in some likelihood. Obviously, over time, as you educate an audience, people that thing can change. But if we think the first sort of mobile games when they came in, they were very, very different to console games. Now you're sort of running console games on mobile because everything's tech's better, hardware's better, community sort of knows what they're doing. But that took quite a long time. If you think, the first games were quite different experiences. So, and I think blockchain is much more radical than just changing sort of the form factor. So.
Yeah. Anyway, from one sort of successful Web3 game to another, hopefully. We are talking about MapleStory Universe's MapleStory N, which is launching globally on the 15th of May. Obviously, this is from Nexon's Web3 arm Next page and has been officially in development for 2 years, but probably longer than that. But that's when they sort of unveiled it, and they have raised 100 million for this for the entire sort of MapleStory universe. That will launch with the NXPC token backing. I don't know, is that token live yet? It's not, is it?
Well, I think they've been running on testnet, so I think yes, it is live, but it's not sort of live, not live to.
The MSU test note you mentioned, Avalanche based, and that will launch its mainnet, Genesis mainnet, in conjunction with the game launch as well. Yeah. So yeah, just dive in a little bit more into MapleStory Universe and tell us sort of why this is actually quite an anticipated game, and why you can have sort of a positive impact on.
Yeah. So I mean, Nexon is one of the big South Korean games companies. I mean, they've all been sort of they've been sort of the region that's been the most sort of enthusiastic about blockchain since sort of 2018. They've not really anything that's come out of that, however, sort of really been successful. Some of the We Made stuff has, but it's hard for us to judge how sort of big MapleStory is as a IP in South Korea. It was the game that launched Nexon sort of 20 years ago. It's done like $2 billion of revenue or something. There's been obviously loads of different versions of it in various forms, but it's at heart it was a sort of 2D PC MMORPG, and just people really loved it. So this is sort of a little bit like often even like people maybe slightly complaining, why is Ubisoft not doing a Assassin's Creed game on blockchain? Sort of dumb stuff like that. In that sense, Nexon is doing its Assassin's Creed on blockchain, because MapleStory, it has lots of other IP now, but MapleStory is something that's quite sort of fundamental to its sort of identity, I think. So it's quite a big deal from that point of view. As you say, it's a project they haven't rushed. They were originally going to be on Polygon, then they've moved to Avalanche. They basically built their own blockchain using the Avalanche sort of a tech, which is what you do these days. They've been always quite sort of clear that this is not a sort of speculative game. So that the token is sort of, we'll see how it actually works, but a lot of it's it's a utility token based around sort of items in the game and how you create those. All the NFT items in the game, they're not being sold by the developer. They're basically being sort of found and crafted by the players and sold on a PvP marketplace. So they, as you say, they've raised a ton of money. I mean, they're a very well capitalized company on the South Korean Stock Exchange, so they don't need to sell a few NFTs, to sort of make their game like a lot of the smaller blockchain companies. So they're coming at it from exactly the right way. I would say the system is pretty complicated. So their whole thing is MapleStory Universe, which is quite a complicated, interlinked version of various games and SDKs, and they've maybe not described it in the way that I at least fully understand until it goes live and we can see what goes on there. But I won't go into that. But clearly they've thought about it, from a very sort of serious, sustainable point of view. And I guess it's sort of this is a really big game to go live fairly soon, and I guess then we'll see exactly how these things play out. I think with that sort of project, it's a sort of a multi-year sort of approach. So obviously, it's going to be a little bit different to some of the other games we see. I've not actually played it yet, so all that they've done 2 play tests, but they've all been geography locked. So I think it's mainly been obviously focused on their core markets in Southeast Asia. But there is a lot of sort of interest around this, and I guess it does go to show, if you're building sort of proper games, it just does take a long time to do these sort of things in a serious manner. And it's sort of just sort of a funny week where I think we have a lot of this sort of news about actually quite serious projects after we've had sort of a few months of sort of generally bad news about sort of people, smaller companies leaving, and obviously token prices are down, all that sort of sentiment. Whereas now we're sort of seeing these people who do sort of believe in it in a more sort of forward-thinking, we don't need to rush it sort of scenario sort of coming through now. So hopefully that's good for the future.
Yeah. So this week, Ultra announced a partnership with Vaulta, which is the former EOS blockchain. So Vaulta today is like a banking, kind of Web3 banking system. So Ultra is going to integrate that into its gaming platform to sort of how would you say, like, sort out the financial side of things, provide sort of secure transactions and yeah. We don't really know that much about the partnership, but
no, I mean, Ultra was built on the EOS sort of SDK, so they're technically they're sort of they've always been pretty close, I think. And I think this partnership has actually been in the works for quite a long time. And as you say, the EOS blockchain was one of these sort of 2017, 2018 sort of. It's going to be the Ethereum beta, like EOS and Tron were seen as these, back when Ethereum was still proof of work, and these were the new proof of stake sort of systems. And it's sort of interesting that Tron's still doing really well as the basically a blockchain, Tether's blockchain. Really, that's what it's used for moving Tether around in China. and EOS sort of like fell away, even though it sort of generated tons of money for its token launch. It sort of never really found a use case. It was it just wasn't. There was games on it. There was stuff on it, but it never really had a personality. But now they sort of rebranded after many years as this sort of say this sort of banking sort of platform. And EOS is quite a fast blockchain. It is actually quite as much as I technically understand these things, it has some very actually clever things around wallets and stuff, and how you could basically have different sort of levels of key access and stuff. We won't go into all that, but that's the sort of stuff that might be quite interesting for sort of sort of banks where you can someone doesn't have full access to do everything on a wallet, but can do certain sort of things, transactions. So I think they thought that the Vaulta thing is they're building like a financial infrastructure around what's a good core sort of blockchain. But because they've always been sort of hanging around with Ultra, and Ultra's now doing this big rebrand and sort of raised some money. We spoke to the CEO a couple of weeks ago. He's sort of very, sort of aggressive about growing this thing. And I think it just, although sort of, having a sort of gaming system and distribution and streaming and stuff and a banking system don't seem necessarily to have a lot of crossover. I think just from the technical point of view, those sort of companies feel stronger together. I think there is some sort of financial part of the deal. That was sort of glossed over. So, I mean, it's interesting that I assume from a consumer point of view, Ultra and Vaulta will be different. There'll be different platforms in the sense that when you that Ultra is a PC download, So I don't think they'll put them into one, but a lot of the back end stuff may sort of end up being the same. And they could obviously also think about what they're doing with their token. So the EOS token is actually still in the top 100. It dropped out and then it's gone back in again. They're rebranding that to the Vaulta token fairly soon. The Ultra token is the EOS token. Again, I mean, that's a very small token, very small market cap. I don't think they're going to rebrand as that. But there may be some things they can sort of do around that. Which would sort of impact on sort of Ultra's, not investment advice, but on the Ultra sort of token. So, as with a lot of stuff with Ultra, I sort of, I think there's still a lot more behind the scenes that they're sort of, not sort of talking about. But it's sort of quite an interesting sort of combination.
No, but it's certainly interesting that it's been very quiet around Ultra for probably over a year, I would say.
Yeah.
They kind of launched their platform and then it just went very quiet, obviously, with the rest of the sentiment in the industry, I suppose. And now it's like it's made this big comeback. So like you say, it'll be interesting to sort of see what's to come from them. Right, let's crack on and move on to Wildcard and the Thousands platform, which Wildcard announced it's made $77,000 this week just from one live stream on the Thousands platform. And you had a good chat this week with Wildcard CEO Paul Bettner. Am I allowed to say that? It comes out next week.
Yeah.
So just dive in again. Tell us a little bit more about Thousands and how Wildcard is leveraging Thousands, I suppose, as a streaming platform and the token and all the nice details.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find the tweet you did actually, but
But anyway, that's super impressive, isn't it? I mean, 77,000 from one live
yeah,
stream. No
I mean,
other
coming
Web3 game, although you wouldn't call it Web3 game anymore, would you? It's a Web2 game streamed through a Web3 game
yeah.
platform.
No, so coming back to, in some ways, sort of similar to Nexon. So Wildcard is a totally Web2 game actually. So there's a bit of confusion about this because they raised like $47 million and everyone thought it was a Web3 game, but it was never a Web3 game. Sort of a very interesting sort of combination of a MOBA, sort of a 2v2 MOBA, with sort of card collection, and a very sports sort of overview of it. So that's the game. It's a PC game. They're doing early access testing on Steam now. If you can wishlist it on Steam, and they're letting people in. They're playing sort of sessions over every weekend, I think. But the Web3 thing is this platform called Thousands, which is sort of actually like a version of Twitch, really. And originally they didn't want to build their own sort of streaming platform, but they thought they could do it through Twitch. But in the end, they couldn't do it through Twitch. And what they wanted to do. So this guy Paul Petner worked on a lot of the Age of Empires games, a famous PC strategy series. Then him and his brother set up a company, and they made Words with Friends, massive, a very early mobile sort of hit, and they got bought by Zynga for like $50 million. And then they did some VR stuff. So, he's very good at looking at new technology and thinking, what can we do that's new? And that was, how they sort of started thinking about sort of blockchain and Wildcard. He's not a crypto guy at all. He's as he sort of says, he's sort of very skeptical, to some degree on sort of the speculative stuff. So he's really tried to stay away from that, and they were never going to have NFTs in the game, or the game is a pure, skill-based sort of game. But he has been thinking a lot about this explosion in streaming and people watching games, and now obviously more people watch games than play games, and you can be part of a community of a game and never have played it, and as these games get more skillful, that's more likely to sort of happen because these are quite complicated games now, and why would you play these games badly when you can watch sort of the top players sort of playing them? So he's been thinking about how can I sort of do something where at the moment it's a very broken sort of system. So people stream stuff and maybe they can sort of get sort of tips to some degree, but it's very hard to do external to crypto. So he's sort of thinking about really how would you make a platform where the people who are sort of content creators and streamers who are building the community and have their own sort of micro communities of the people watching them, and you may want to watch some sort of there may be a big tournament going and you may want to watch this streamer, not this streamer, because you like their style more or something like that. And obviously those people are bringing people into the ecosystem. So obviously the whole thing about sort of attribution. If you bring in someone to this game who then spends a ton of money, it's really hard for the game developer to give you a share of that. Without crypto. So that's really what they've been doing with this Thousands of sort of game. It's Thousands platform. So there's that part of it. And also it links into Wildcard. And so there's sort of, as things are happening in a Wildcard game, the sort of audience can interact, not in exactly what's going on in the game, but they can sort of interact around that. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we won't go into, which is sort of more linked into the meta part of Wildcard, which is more like a sort of sports games, a sport, sort of the economy of a sports sort of franchise system and all this sort of stuff. So there's quite a lot they're planning to do. They just started the early stages of Thousands. Again, they're sort of testing it every weekend. I think it is. They've done 12 or 13 streams so far of Wildcard. And they're just getting more and more people in. And Paul just had given out some data around this. So looking at it here. So the last stream they did, the people who were the spectators watching the game spent almost $78,000 while the stream was happening, buying sort of in-app purchases that allow them to sort of do some of these sort of things in terms of the interactivity of the sort of audience around the game, and even some of the so the average revenue per viewer, which is not really a stat, you really see you have average revenue per player or average revenue per playing user. Those are sort of the main stats you use. But this is average revenue per viewer. People viewing was $109. So that's sort of, we were joking about it. We were doing the podcast. I was saying, well, normally I'd say that's a golden cohort, and clearly it is. But this is people watching. If a TV show had I'm watching sort of the European Cup final, and I'm paying $100 somehow to be part of to cheer more loudly for Liverpool or something, or not Liverpool knocked out now, but Arsenal clearly. TV companies would bite your arm off. So obviously again, this is a golden cohort. Things not live, blah blah blah. You're going to have really committed people at this stage, but that's a lot of money people are spending. And it says average viewer to player conversion is 51%. So over half of the people who are viewing through this platform are spending something. Obviously, as you scale up these audiences, obviously those numbers sort of drop off quite considerably. But it is interesting that again, this is another way of Pixels is doing it sort of directly with a token in their game. Wildcard, they're very focused on the game. Also on the podcast actually with me was the lead designer Brad, and he was sort of interesting how he'd come in and sort of force them to rethink. There's been quite a lot of changes under the hood around how that game has actually worked. That game's been in development in various forms for like 7 years. The game is really core to them in terms of if the game doesn't work, none of this other stuff's going to work. But then the thing they want to do is build a community where it can be sustainable and people, who are bringing the community around and into the game also get a share of it. And that's very blockchain. That's very like aligned incentives. That's what Luke talks about in Pixels. They've not been aligned. They've been giving tokens to people who've just been, selling them. And that's bad for everyone in the ecosystem because the token price has gone down for everyone. So it's a really interesting way of doing it. I say with Wildcard and Thousands, they have a Wildcard token, WC token. So it's a pure sort of meme coin. The team don't have any of it. It's just literally there for the community. At the moment, it's locked, so that it is being used. So this is driving some of this monetization. So in a sense, you could think this is people buying the Wildcard coin, even though obviously will have a value, but it's it's very much designed to to be just used and spent in the game. So again, another really interesting way of building a sort of more gaming ecosystem or game plus an ecosystem that you couldn't do, with Web 2 technology. It'd be almost impossible to do Stripe or something like that because the speed at which you're giving these rewards away. So again, it's still early days for that, but it was a really long podcast, longest one I've done, so almost an hour. And I didn't ask all my questions, but he's a really, as I sort of expected. I've seen him, talk. Yeah, he's a really, really personable sort of character. He can't shut up, basically. He just loves talking, but he's so enthusiastic, and it's, and as I say, he's gone through these. This is like his fourth cycle into gaming tech, and the VR one wasn't super successful because VR just hasn't been super successful. But he's really, pure gamer. Actually, he said a lot of the team he's working with now are people he's worked with for, back in the Age of Empires days. So really very, experienced team. Really sort of know what they're doing. Well funded. So again, that's another one I think to sort of look forward to. As again, all these Pixels, MapleStory, Wildcard may or not work, but I think they're sort of proving out that the blockchain game sector isn't about rubbish play to earn, pumped tokens and rugs and inexperienced teams not being able to do it. These are all people who have made been successful in games, or certainly Paul and Nexon, and Luke's been a successful entrepreneur. So these are people who really sort of, as much as anyone does, know what they're doing.
Well, no, exactly. What stands out is that these are developers that come into it with a passion for the game they want to make, and they won't sort of settle before it's working, before the game is good. Like you said about the Wildcard dev team, they would not release the game until everybody on the team were absolutely obsessed with the game. So it's not sort of people who are rushing to get it out or sort of happy with a half-made game sort of thing. So
No, and he says, Paul says pretty much every great game I've worked on, you sort of get to a stage where you're like, oh, is it good enough to go yet? I mean, commercial considerations aside, but basically from a game design point of view or gameplay point of view, we could launch it now. We fix all the bugs and everything, and then it's like that last sort of 6 to 12 months where you go, we've basically got something that's good and functional, and now how do we make it great? How do we make it? Basically says, how do you get it so the team work on the game all day, and then when they go home, they play the game? That's the point at which you've got a great game. This is not a 7 out of 10 game. This is not a game that sort of just hits its numbers. This is and he's made games that have been sort of words with friends, sort of cultural phenomenon. So I'm not saying Wildcard will be that, but that's it's sort of the highest bar that you can have if you're a game maker, and we've not really seen very much of that in blockchain.
Good. Right, so there's been some rumours. Well, it started out as sort of rumours, and then some people actually sort of looked into it more in detail, and it doesn't seem to be just rumours that Pokemon Home is to some extent integrating some blockchain in its backend, but it's obviously not in any way that the end user is sort of noting any of this for now anyway, but just let us in on the details there.
Yeah, sort of funny. I think this would have been sort of the biggest story of most weeks, and sort of now it's sort of big, sort of been put in the shade by these other more sort of stories that we know are happening. So it's a little bit behind. It is very much sort of, it's not rumor mongering, but basically I don't know how people have found it out, but there's a Pokemon Home, which is the sort of the hub sort of app, mobile, or it's mobile or Switch app, in which you sort of connect mainly Switch games, but you can sort of move Pokemon around from these games into the sort of home, and then you can there's various sort of interactions you can do to get various other sort of elements. You can sort of share them with other people and stuff, but you can't generally bring them back into games. Anyway, not an expert in that. Someone noticed that so Nintendo said we're doing this new thing called medals in Pokemon Home. In the mobile version of Pokemon Home, there is this thing called medals, and they are going to be sort of limited edition sort of events. So they're sort of like badges, and you can sort of collect them. I think it's sort of moment 12 or something. So there's this idea that there's a new sort of asset going in there, and as part of that, you had to update the terms and conditions of the app, and someone's gone through and seen that what's changed is they've added this company called Parasol Technologies into the privacy notice. And what's interesting is Parasol Technologies is a tech startup from game developers, US and Japanese game developers, fairly experienced, but it's basically a Web3 sort of platform for handling sort of NFTs and basically blockchain games. And it's been bought by Miston Labs, which runs the Sui blockchain. So its stuff is running on Sui. They're actually, Parasol Technologies is actually helping to make a game that's using an old Sega IP, I guess mainly for the Japanese market. But they are a purely Web3 tech company. So I guess you could use that tech in a Web2 sort of manner, or you could run that tech, you could sort of fork the Sui blockchain and run it as a permission system. So it's sort of like a Web2 database. Don't know why you would want to do that, really. So it seemed, it's definitely the case that a Web3 gaming technology platform holder is now being used by this Pokemon Home app. The other interesting thing is it's only in certain countries, so only basically countries, European countries, not in China, Japan, or Korea. So they have more specific rules about crypto in general. So it's only for the mobile app. Most people will use Pokemon Home in Switch, and it's only for these certain countries, and it's only for this new asset. So with a sort of hopeful view, you may think, surprising as it is, that Nintendo, which is very technology conservative, very obviously careful of its sort of child friendly status, but it seems to have integrated at least in its back end, some sort of blockchain technology. So clearly this is not going to be because they are going to be launching a Nintendo token or NFT or making Pokemon's NFTs. But you could imagine if we think, that blockchain is just a database technology that's sort of secure and open, and you can do much more. You can do things in a much better way than you can do for some use cases than Web2. Then you would think these big companies probably would be using it in some way. The fact it's Nintendo doing it seems sort of surprising. But we assume, in the best case scenario, probably what we assume is they're using it as a sort of test case to sort of add extra security and sort of see how people are sort of transferring these things or using these things. Obviously, as we said, in all games, you get loads of bots. People sell their Nintendo accounts because they got a rare Pokemon. People even sell Pokemon. I don't know how they do that, but you can go to sites and go, I want someone to find me this rare Pokemon and pay for it. So all these, all Web 2 games have some degree the same problems as Web 3 games. Web 3 games it's much bigger because you can make real money from it. But over time, even if it's not being exposed to players on a here's an NFT, you can sell it. We'd expect more of this stuff to get into sort of Web 2 games, and clearly you can still do as Mythical Games do with their NFL Rivals game. You have a full blockchain game where blockchain is never mentioned. No one knows they're doing wallets there, but they're buying and selling players between themselves. And that's still the best example of a blockchain game that most of the users won't know it's blockchain. So that's all where we imagine that's how we imagine the sort of blockchain comes into the game's intro for the next 10 years. It's just all behind the scenes, and it's just computers talking to each other, and no one knows about it. So as I say, this is a big story because it was Nintendo, and obviously there was no one said anything about it officially. So Nintendo didn't say anything about it. Miston Labs didn't say anything about it. Blah blah blah. So we don't quite know, the exact sort of level of sort of functionality, but it's sort of positive from what we can gather.
Yeah, good. And Apple's App Store made it into headlines this week, quite a lot and quite significantly. They are going to have to back down on their ban of apps using the App Store not being allowed to bring users and players off the platform basically to their own marketplaces and stores. And this has had an impact on Epic Game Store, which has then now released some news in light of that. So tell us more about that, please.
Yeah, well, this is like a long-term sort of thing that Apple and Google have obviously had this 30% tax on any. They basically forced all the apps using their app stores to pay a 30% tax on revenue. So if I spend $100 in Pokemon Go, Apple or Google take 30% of that, however I'm accessing Pokemon Go. So that's been under pressure for a while. And so in this particular case, Epic's had a long-going case against Apple. It actually lost most of its case, but part of it is still going on. And it actually won that in the sense, people have been doing this for a few years now, that you can have an app in the Apple App Store, and within there you can have an alternative method. So it can say, buy your gems using in-app purchase in the App Store, or click on this link to get a better deal. Or they probably can't say that sort of thing, but you click on this link and it takes you to a web store, and then you obviously get a better deal there because you're not paid, because the developer is getting all the money. So in this particular case, Apple was trying to stop people linking out, and it lost that case. But then they were allowed to set what the tax was going to be for people buying things outside the App Store, but through apps through the App Store. And instead of 30%, they came up with 27%, which is sort of hilariously sort of cocking a snoot at the lawyer, at the judge, because they could have come up with anything. And there's been internal documents coming out saying some people said, it should be 20%, and blah, 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 and they came up with 27%. And the judge has sort of written this furious case just saying Apple, is totally taking the piss, and it's just made up this money. It's made up this 27% for no reason other than to, it's as high as it thought it could go. It couldn't do 29% would be too ridiculous. So basically now you can now link out, and and Apple can't take any of the money if someone's linking out from the App Store to buy these things through a web store, what they call a web store. Apple can't take any of that, and lots of companies have been doing this. So Supercell was one of the first to go quite aggressively into this, and now some of these big companies, can take sort of 10-20% of their overall revenue for their games, their apps can be through their own web store. So obviously they're getting they're not giving 30% to Apple and Google for that. What Epic's doing now is Epic also, as part of its case, has been allowed to have its own app store. So there's the Epic Game Store for PC games. There's also the Epic Game Store for mobile games. So on Android, you have to sort of sideload it through. You can just download it as an APK. I've not done it for Apple yet, but you can do it on iPhone and iPad. So basically, sort of, it's like an alternative store. It's not very clear how many people are doing that on mobile, because obviously if you buy an iPhone, you get App Store straight away, embedded, and with Google, you get the Play Store. So how many people are going around to download another App Store? Generally, not a large amount. So it's probably not a big, significant number of people doing this. But anyway, Epic have said if people are releasing games through their if developers are releasing games through the Epic Game Store on mobile, they get the first $1 million of revenue for free. And then after that, they'll pay Epic 12%. So obviously that's it's a slightly headline grabbing sort of feature because, as I said, most people, the percentage of phones that are going to have the Epic Game Store on it will be pretty small. Probably small, 1 or 2 or 3% or something like that. But if you can basically get your game community to be doing that, then for some developers that's going to be quite a big deal because they're going to take the first $1 million, they're going to get all that themselves, and so they're effectively getting $300,000, that they wouldn't otherwise get. So we'll see how it plays out. Gabe Leiden, one of the sort of the someone who's been very successful in mobile games and is now doing Web3, he's very pleased about this. He's very good at marketing, so I think he sort of thinks with crypto sort of virality and the ability to sort of drive people to do things by giving them tokens or value. But the sort of games he's thinking about doing, he thinks this is a pretty big deal. If he's going to get, he's going to be able to drive a lot more of the revenue that he wants, keep that himself. I'm not sure many developers have his same level of experience and funding to be able to take advantage of this. But obviously, as some start to take advantage of that, then obviously more people will sort of understand how you do it, and as more consumers are doing it and being incentivized to doing it, then you drive a sort of flywheel. So it's a question of what games can sort of really drive this. And obviously, as you said, the Epic Game Store has been quite open for blockchain games on PC, so obviously it's not going to be an issue for that on mobile. So again, it's just another sort of case of sort of an opportunity, a trend that's playing into sort of what would help Web3 games. You don't get any of this stuff for free. As I say, I think if you're Gabe Leiden, who's raised $200 million or whatever it was 3 years ago, and have seemingly done nothing, but do all these sort of protocols, it's now looking very good for you because you've built out all these protocols, these Apptoken things where you can control what's going on with the economy, and now all these sort of channels are being opened up to you, and you have experience of doing billions of dollars of revenue through app stores. And if you can manage to do that now, you're going to save 30% of that. So particularly for him, he's sitting there rubbing his hands. So they're working on a game called Digijaigaku, or at least those are the NFT characters. So we've no idea what that's going to turn out like. We've no idea when that's coming, but even more sort of interest will be focused on that game now because it has so many sort of moving parts that fit into some of these big opportunities that are now emerging in the game space. And Gabe has been very good in the past at exploiting those to their maximum.
Obviously, with mobile games being the biggest kind of chunk of games that are out there, and seemingly so in Web3 as well, when we've done our Mavens monthly Mavens feature, the one where we asked developers about the future of Web3 games on mobile, we've never had as much contributions and opinions and actually, yeah. So I do think it will have sort of bigger implications than what we might see now immediately.
And I think, obviously you've mentioned them as well just now, but Mythical games are basically a mobile first sort of platform, and they and so it's not quite clear they would gain 30%. The revenue's not going to go up by 30% just because of this, but obviously it encourages them. They've been very good at playing within the rules of the app stores and creating special currencies, in-app purchase currencies that sort of allow them to do blockchain stuff plus the 30% they give to Apple and Google. So you can sort of see it's very much in their interests to start taking people out to web stores and it just provides flexibility to people who already, I wouldn't say they're successful in this space, but relatively successful compared to other games, and I think doing okay, from a financial point of view. But this just maybe gives them a 10%, the chance of like 10% revenue boost just from doing the things they're already doing. So I think it can be there will be some companies who will sort of take full advantage of this. So.
Good. Champagne all around. Right. Anyway, so that's all for this week. Obviously, there was a lot more news as well that we didn't cover in this roundup. Go to blockchaingamer.biz, check out John's newsletters at GamesTX for more news. And thank you very much. We'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.